Gentlemen, you have 2 minutes each for your opening statements, and we'll go left to right, starting with Mr. Harris.
All right, well, thank you. My name is R.J. Harris, and thank you all for coming out tonight for this presidential debate here in Texas, and thank you for inviting a Sooner from Oklahoma to come out and speak with you all here tonight. I hope you won't hold that against me too much. Just to tell you a little bit of background about me, I did run for Congress in 2010, did very well against an establishment Republican candidate, and earned 23% of the vote there in my home district, of the 4th District. We were outspent almost 10-1, but still managed to climb well into the double digits and beyond, so we're really happy about that, and got a lot of very prominent libertarian endorsements for that race. And decided to, after I continued to watch from my most recent deployment to Afghanistan, and I watched as the more and more of our elected officials voting for stimulus and bailouts, and for the loss of our liberties, and for extension of the Patriot Act, and for going along with President Obama on the extension of the budget, or excuse me, on the budget deal, on the increase of the debt limit. It became more and more clear to me that we absolutely must break out of this left-right paradigm if we're going to take a stand and defend this republic. And I can tell you, from a 20-year military career, and I've been on the pointy end of our failed interventionist foreign policy, I intend to make it one of my main focuses and main jobs to end our interventionist foreign policy around the world. Refocus our national defense on defense and away from imperialism and interventionism, as I believe that not only is it unconstitutional, but it's also financially unsustainable. So I just want to I want to be able to thank all of you for coming here tonight, and let you know that I'm looking forward to answering your questions and sharing the debate stage with my esteemed colleagues here, and look forward to speaking with you all tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Guy McClendon and the Harris County Party for putting this together tonight. I think we're going to do a good job. These events are not easy, and I know Guy has worked very many long hours. A little bit about me. I joined the Libertarian Party in 1977, and we just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and when I joined the party, it was questionable whether we would even be in existence 2 years later, or 3 or 4, and here we are at 40 years. We're not going away. We're here to stay, and we're here to make a difference. We cannot, it's no longer at a point where we can ignore what happens in Washington, D.C. We've got to take some kind of defensive action against them, and we need to reduce the size of the federal government. A little bit more about me. I've served in numerous positions within the party. I've been our Bexar County chair. I was the chairman for the Clark for President campaign in 1980 in Bexar County. I have served 2 terms as Texas State Chair, and I had been elected to public office in 1993. The San Antonio River Authority was there for 6 years. And also I've been a candidate in November of 2010, and again November of 2011, and hopefully again in 2012. I'm not new to the running for office, and I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting people throughout the country. My primary purpose is to build the party. It's been a slow growth, but we are getting more and more people. Most encouraging thing to me is when, particularly in Florida, when we met a young man in college who had just learned about the Libertarian Party and could sit there and tell me more about libertarian philosophy than I knew. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Mr. Wright.
Good evening. I also would like to thank Mr. McClellan and the Harris County Party for putting on this great event, and for having so many energetic candidates here tonight. Not us, but the people that you just heard from. I was thrilled. My name is Lee Wright. I want to be your next president so I can leave you alone. I tell people at all these events that we go to, I'm not running for president so I can do things. I'm running for president so I can undo things. You've got politicians who've been doing things for too long. We need to undo some things. First thing we need to undo is the wars that we're involved with. I'm not just talking about the foreign interventions, I'm talking about the wars right here at home. It seems like that our political rhetoric has become rife with war. Every time somebody gets mad at something or wants to do something about something, we've got to have a war on it, you know. War on drugs, and we all know what a failing proposition that's been. Had to have a war on poverty back in the 60s, we still got poor people. Had to have a war on ignorance in the 70s. We've been churning out functional illiterates ever since. All this tells me is that wars don't work. We do much better with conversation, commerce. And it's wrong that the first thing we move to when we have a dispute with someone is bombs and guns, rather than conversation. Rather than trying to find out what the problem is, we try to annihilate the problem, apparently. And this has got to stop. Every child in this country, 10 years of age or less, have never known anything from their country but war. It's time for us to give them a little bit of peace. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All right, gentlemen, the first question, and we will go from left to right, my left to my right. First question is, what federal departments would you eliminate and why? Mr. Harris.
A lot of them. I would eliminate any and all federal departments which are grossly unconstitutional, that are unconstitutional. But just to name a few, with the short amount of time I have to give this answer, I would start with the Federal Department of Education, as there is no constitutional underpinning for the Department of Education. Education is something that belongs to our individual citizens and to our communities, not to the federal government to dictate to us how to educate our children. So I would start there. I would also continue on into the Transportation and Security Agency, the TSA. I would also look to immediately eliminate the TSA, as there is absolutely no excuse for the allowance that they have made, for our federal government that has made for the sexual assault and naked body scanning of our women and our children at our airports. That will stop under my administration and no longer continue to happen as we bring the TSA to a close. Also eliminate the Department of Homeland Security, as that needs to be handed back off to our Army National Guard, our Air National Guard, which is basically our militia. Our National Guard has defended this republic since before the time that it was a republic, and we do not need yet another unconstitutional federal bureaucracy to provide another layer to take away that job from the soldiers and airmen that have already been doing that job for quite some time and doing it well. So I would also look to eliminate the TSA, and that's a good example of, because I'm not going to be able to get to all the departments that I'd like to eliminate in the time allotted, but we see here how that's a duplicity of government bureaucracy and layers. So we look to eliminate the Department of Homeland Security because it continues to duplicate efforts. I would also look at things like the EPA, the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, and others that are on dubious unconstitutional grounds.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Gary, anytime you want to repeat the question, just let me know.
I think the answer, that it'd be easier to answer which ones would I keep. Keep the Treasury Department, keep Department of Defense, keep the State Department, and keep the Interior Department long enough to dispose of the massive amounts of federally held lands that are in the western United States and get them in privately owned hands where they can be managed productively. My first target for getting rid of a department would be, without a doubt, Homeland Security. One of the main things I object to on that is simply the name of it, because saying that you've got a homeland implies that you've got an empire, and I'm not interested in building an empire. And then it's fair game for all the rest of them, and like Mr. Harris said, we could be here all night trying to list all of them to get rid of, but we've got to start somewhere, and Homeland Security is absolutely my first choice. Thank you.
Mr. Rice?
Well, I'd have to agree. You just about take your pick. I work well alone, so I don't feel like I need a lot of help. Homeland Security would be top of my list. We've had a Department of Homeland Security since the beginning of this country. It's called Department of Defense. And that's what we need to go back to, is defense, and not be so offensive about our situations and our answers to questions when they come up. I'd look to do away with the DEA. The drug war has got to stop. We're perpetrating a war that kills more people than the drugs that everybody's so afraid of. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, should be a convenience store. Should be a federal. I mean, I agree with my colleagues here. You can take your pick. And it's funny, this first question accentuates something that I pointed out before, that we don't really have a debate. We're here for a job interview to answer your questions, seeking your nomination. I'm proud to be standing with these men and to know that we feel so closely about all of these regulatory agencies that need to be gotten rid of. Like I said, the Homeland Security would be the first one that I would take care of, take it out completely. I know I expect the unemployment rate in Washington, D.C. to go up quite a bit as soon as I take office.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Question number 2, starting with Mr. Gary. Considering economic stimulus applied to date, how can we avoid a currency collapse?
We can't. Every government in written history has debased their currency, and not a one to this date has ever made it work. I don't see how that we're any smarter and can make it work either. We need to live up to the Constitution with a solid gold or silver currency, and that'll take care of many problems in itself, but I don't see how we could possibly avoid a collapse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Mr. Rice?
Well, my colleague, Mr. Gary, is absolutely right. We can't avoid it. We've just been prolonging the problem. The recent raising of the debt ceiling is a classic example. You can't spend your way out of debt, folks. It's impossible. Best thing that we can do for this country is repeal all legal tender laws. Return gold, silver, precious metals, and whatnot to the currency market. And it won't be long, the greenbacks will go away because they're worthless, and people know it. People want money that's worth something. When they hold it in their hand, they can look at it and they know they have value. And if we're going to be strong again in this country, we have to return value to our currency. We can't avoid the collapse. We can only find alternatives to it once it comes. I mean, I hate to say it, but the sooner it comes, the better. Then we can get on to fixing the problem, because until then, all we do is slap Band-Aids on a sucking chest wound instead of actually doing the surgery it takes to fix the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Harris?
With gold approaching $2,000 an ounce, I personally believe that we're already in the midst of the currency collapse as opposed to avoiding it. I think it's already here. But I also do think that the power to arrest the situation and reverse it is available to us if we'll just turn back to the Constitution, which is supposed to govern this policy. And that is to, as I intend to do as president, immediately upon taking office, is to direct the Department of Justice to begin an immediate investigation of the Federal Reserve and their activities. And then to follow that up with actions to end the Federal Reserve system and their method of issuing out a debt-based currency, which is basically making slaves of all of us, our children and our grandchildren, and return to an Article 1, Section 8 based currency issued by our Congress, which the Constitution gives to our Congress, not to any private bank, not to the Federal Reserve. And so what we have to do, and in addition to these things on monetary policy, we have to stand up to the spending of our federal Congress, who continues to borrow money from China to deficit spend and to pay for things that we have no business paying for, that are well outside the Constitution, and continuing to run up our national debt. And so it's kind of a two-part thing. We can't continue to spend money that we don't have. We cannot continue to steal from the American people and buy things that they didn't give us authority to buy. And we cannot continue to print and issue a debt-based currency from a private bank, which is basically enslaving us all. So I think that that the words of those that have come before us on this issue ring truer now today than they ever have, and that is, if the American people were aware of the gross injustice of our monetary and banking system, there would be a revolution by morning.
Question 3, starting with Mr. Wrights. What actions will you take to put Americans back to work?
Deregulation. Get government out of the way. It's the best thing we can do for Americans all across the board, including creating jobs. I saw a study that spoke, I believe it was the Institute of Justice that did it. For every regulator that we put out of work, 150 private sector jobs are created. For every regulator, 150 private sector jobs are created. There's your answer right there. Do like we were talking about before. Start with these federal agencies and start chopping them down, getting rid of them. Get regulations out of the way so that small businesses particularly can grow and prosper. We have regulations at every level, so much so that it's hard for the small businesses in this country to thrive. We make it almost impossible for them to hire new people to work. There's no wonder we have the problems that we have with all the government that we have in the way. So the simple answer to the question is, as best of my ability as president, is to get government out of our way.
Thank you, Mr. Wrights. Mr. Harris.
Government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem.
You're here.
And so what I intend to do is to not follow what we've seen from our previous recent presidents and the Congresses that have been with them, which is more and more socialistic stimulus spending. Our president has recently proposed a $500 billion jobs plan, and yet if more of that deficit spending was the answer, the $15 trillion that we're already in debt would have already put us all back to work by now. So we know that more of the stimulus money is not the solution to the problem. What is the solution to the problem, as Mr. Wrights pointed out, is deregulation, and to get the government out of the way of our small business, of our entrepreneurs, of our big business, of any business that needs to that is out there attempting to market their products and services and put Americans back to work, but they can't because of the massive oppression upon them from overregulation and overtaxation. And so that's exactly what I would do as president, is get the government out of the economy's way. I don't want to be president to run the economy. I want to be the president to let you, the American people, and our markets handle the economy. That's who should be running the economy, not the federal government.
You're here.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
I think one of the major factors in getting our people back to work was addressed in the previous question, and that's, let's return to a solid currency, one that is based on gold or silver, which historically is your best ones, to where people, when they go to work, they know that when they put their money aside to save it or invest in additional job-creating jobs, that 5 or 10 years from now, they'll get back something that's worth something. It's and then, like our other two gentlemen said, of course, you get the government out of the way. And I don't know how much more to add to those two.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's 3 questions, gentlemen. You're going to have to start disagreeing with each other somewhere.
I told you, it's an interview, it's not a debate.
Yes, you nailed it with that one. All right, question number 4 is the most important one, because as a U.S. physician, I want to know, I'd like to hear you explain your vision for the U.S. healthcare system. Mr. Harris.
I don't think that there should, the kind of premise that underlies the question there is at issue with me, because I don't think there should be a quote-unquote U.S. healthcare system. I think that the healthcare is a personal welfare that we provide for ourselves, And it's also something that our communities will deal with. There's some communities, like libertarians, would want to do it one way. Some communities that have different leadership might do it another way. But Article 1, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States reserves all powers not given to the federal government to the states. So, the federal government doesn't know what's best for our health care. And my gosh, do we want the U.S., the federal government, having all of our personal private data, having control of all of our health care, knowing what our ailments are, knowing what medications we have to take, telling us what we can and cannot have, what kind of procedures we need and don't need? I mean, that is just crazy, and it is a fundamental infringement into our freedom, our liberty, and our privacy. So as president, I will refuse on day one to enforce Obamacare. I will not enforce it, because what I will look to as my authority is in Article 2, which says that the President of the United States will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States first. That is what's most critical. And that trumps any tyranny of the majority passed by simple legislation. And so I will look to that mandate and not enforce what is obvious to be unconstitutional legislation. And so, my short response is there shouldn't be a federal U.S. health system. It should be, it's a power that's been reserved to we, the sovereign citizens, to provide for our own social services and or, at best, for our communities to be involved in that. But it should never be something that the federal government is involved in.
Thank you, Mr. Gary.
Well, I think that question kind of obviously was aimed at towards Obamacare, but I think there's something out there that's just as insidious, and that's the FDA.
You're here.
When I watch television and I see all these commercials from attorneys saying, if you've been injured taking this drug, which they were all FDA approved, please call us. How well is the FDA taking care of us? But even worse than that, what about all the drugs that somebody is in a terminal situation with cancer or some other, and there are drugs out there that are approved in other parts of the world, but our FDA hasn't gotten around to approving them, so we can't use them. There's experimental drugs. If your life expectancy is 30 days, what difference does it make whether you take an unapproved drug or not? Let's try something. Let's not just sit around and wait for our loved ones to die. So I think the FDA is one that definitely needs a major overhaul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Government can't protect you at the local mall. Why in the world would we want to turn something as important as our health care over to a bunch of people that can't even do that? I don't want anyone in between me and my doctor when I get sick. I don't want a bureaucrat in the way. I don't want an insurance company in the way. I don't want my mother in the way. Health care is something that goes beyond government. It is something that's personal for each individual. Mr. Harris mentioned the 10th Amendment and everything not delegated to the federal government. Those powers are regulated to the state, but it didn't stop there. It said to the state and to the people. This is one place where no one should get in the way of the people and how they care for themselves, what doctor they see, what kind of treatments they seek. Mr. Gary makes a fine point with the FDA. That's another agency that we need to do away with quickly, because the FDA kills more people than it helps just by keeping drugs off the market, just by keeping solutions out of people's hands. Yes, let's use the 10th Amendment on this and return this particular thing to the people where it belongs.
Question 5. How should the U.S. address the risk that Iran may develop nuclear weapons? Mr. Gary.
We're aggravating everybody in the rest of the world. One of the things I enjoy very much is reading 10 to 15-year-old Reader's Digests. because you can, when you read them, you can see how wrong they are or how right they were on something. And one I particularly remember reading was their long report on the first attack that was on the World Trade Center. And they clearly identified Iran as being a problem child behind that and the instigator. And yet when it came time for us to go into the Middle East and accuse somebody of 9/11, we went to Iraq. We didn't go to Iran. And when we meddle in the affairs of every nation in the world, it shouldn't be a surprise that these people don't like us. I don't much like us when we do that. And I know as a Texan, I highly resent people from New York City coming down here and telling me, gee, back home we did it so-and-so. And I'd say, fine. You want help with an airplane ticket to go home? And I'm sure the people in the rest of the world feel the same way with us. We want to tell them how to run their affairs. We need to quit telling everybody in the world. Quit meddling them. Quit being the nosy neighbor and become a good neighbor. And if we can open trade with everybody and free trade, we'll be friends and not enemies. Thank you.
Well, this is one of the issues that is dear to my heart. I speak about it wherever we go, and Mr. Gary has already touched on it. This nosy neighbor policy that America seems to embrace. We have to fix all the problems of the world. We have to go and stick our nose into everybody's business, no matter what it is. And he's right. This is why so many nations are angry with us in the first place. If we didn't try to solve our own problems with bombs and guns, and we took a little bit of time to have conversation and open up these trade routes, we wouldn't have these kind of problems that we have. It would be a better place to live in the whole world. What America can do for the rest of the world in these kind of instances is set a good example. We preach about freedom. We tell the world about the wonders of being the land of the free and the home of the brave, and then we go somewhere else and act like a tyrant. So they don't believe us. What we need to start doing is being good examples, showing them how freedom works, how peace and prosperity follow these trade and conversation that I've been talking about. You don't teach people it's wrong to bomb people by bombing them. You don't teach people it's wrong to kill people by killing people. They don't get that message. They get the wrong message. The message we need to start bringing to people is peace, and how peace will bring prosperity to them, not only America, but the rest of the world. Look how much we have to offer the rest of the world. We have much more to offer them than bombs. And that's what we should be concentrating on. Iran, you know, Mr. Gary again is right. We have something that's horrible. The rest of the world's going to want it too. Why? Because they're afraid of us. Let's stop making them afraid of us. Let's start making friends.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Harris.
Well, one of the very first things I intend to do as president is to stop all foreign aid. Now, right now, we are borrowing money. We're already $15 trillion in debt and going further in debt. And we're borrowing money to spread it around and make friends in the Middle East. And that's giving enemies that aren't always, or nations that aren't always friendly to us, the means to engage in these nuclear weapon programs to begin with. So I would stop that practice, not only because it's financially not sustainable, but it's also ridiculous, and it's totally outside the foreign policy of our first 5 presidents, who talked about free trade, honest friendship, and peace with all nations, instead of entangling alliances and as Mr. Wrights and Mr. Gary pointed out here, you know, saber rattling and war rhetoric. So I would look to end the foreign policy of attempting to buy friends with borrowed money. That would stop immediately under my presidency. Furthermore, I would also intend to refocus our national defense strategy on one that is defense-centric and not offense-centric, which is also totally financially unsustainable. So while at the same time we can stop the practice of giving away money to buy friends, which allows certain nations to do things with that money that obviously we don't think is very safe for the world and don't think that they ought to be doing, but at the same time we do need to provide for the common defense of this republic, and we can do so through our robust maritime services, which again our first 5 presidents pointed out. So I believe that what we can do is make any type of nuclear missile program obsolete by using defense measures like a missile shield deployed through our naval forces. That way, nations like Iran realize that it's ridiculous to pursue the policy because it's not going to work for them.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. You're the first to get the bell. All right. Question 6. What is your response to solutions offered by Democrats and Republicans for securing the border? Mr. Wright.
Well, I didn't realize they had solutions for securing the border. I just haven't seen any. I know they talk a lot about it. And of course, basically this goes to the illegal immigrant question. The problem there, again, if we look into it, is government. Now, I just saw a Stossel report 3 or 4 months ago. If you want to immigrate to this country and you're from India and you have a PhD, it takes between 5 and 7 years to complete the process and become a citizen here in the country. And meanwhile, while you're doing that, you can come here and work on a visa. If you're an unskilled laborer from south of the border, the same process takes 130 years. Now, it just stands to reason that if you make a law, regulation, or a rule that is impossible to follow, nobody's going to follow it. So once again, we see that government creates its own problems by regulation, and silly regulations at that. I mean, I don't know that many 130-year-old people. I don't know, maybe some of y'all do, but I haven't seen that many of them. And if they do make it that far, I doubt if they care anymore whether they're a citizen of this country or not. People want to come here to work because they still believe in the American dream, making a better life for themselves, their children, their families. We should facilitate that, make it possible for them, stop making it impossible, and we won't need to worry about securing the border so much. Now, again, I'm a former military man myself, as Mr. Harris. I know the importance of securing our borders and keeping it secure so that you can't have an invading army crossing. My solution to that is to bring our defense home. Put them on the borders where we have true defense instead of sending them somewhere else to kill people that just makes them want to come here and do bad things to us again.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Harris.
As I travel around and discuss this issue with our fellow citizens all over the country, I've come to notice that this discussion on immigration is a lot of late dominated by the conservative rhetoric. And many times their arguments to me are that they're upset about the notions or the practices of giving social welfares to illegal immigrants, and or they see what they perceive to be jobs going to illegal immigrants. So what I have proposed to do, and whenever I have these discussions, I almost never have someone disagree with me on this. And that is, well, what we ought to do is attack the problem and not the symptoms. Attack what's wrong and not the immigrants themselves who are looking to add their skills and their and what they have to bring to our society to help make us better. We should be attacking them. We should be attacking the underlying problems. And what I see those problems to be is the socialism that grips our federal government. So as president, I would look to cut back on socialism at as many levels as possible and try to remove all of those wrong incentivizations out there that the federal government tries to throw out there. And also the government regulation and the socialism that pushes our businesses overseas and then dries up our job market. So if we fix those things, then all of a sudden, those folks out there that have an issue with immigrants no longer have an issue with immigrants, because we'll have more than enough jobs to go around. And we will no longer be burdening and stealing from the American taxpayer to pay for social welfares at the federal level that we all know are unconstitutional for people regardless of whether it's for us or for immigrants. So those are the areas that I would look to attack. And I would understand also that, you know, China and India have very growing and exploding middle-class populations, and the way to compete with that is by looking to a robust immigration policy, one that looks to be very permissive and to increase the size of our middle class and increase the size of our market base.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Gary.
For many, many years, there's been a natural prejudice in this country against immigrants. It used to be the Italians. It used to be the Irish. And yet each one of those groups has added to the fabric of this country tremendously. Our Mexican brothers and sisters will also. Now the question was about what the Republicans and Democrats are doing. Building the silly fence along the border didn't work in Berlin. It sure as hell's not going to work on the Rio Grande. And so that's one absurdity that they do. I agree with Mr. Harris and Mr. Wright. There's a lot of underlying questions as to welfare, is why these people go. But I know very many Mexicans nationals. Some are here legally, some of them are not. But they are very productive, contributing members to our society, and I'm proud to know them. They are hardworking. And I tend to favor a much more lenient policy for letting them in.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Question 7. What constitutional amendments do you support, if any? Mr. Harris.
Well, given that our founders, and at the time that the Constitution was ratified, they included Article 5, which was for us to address things that came about that we didn't foresee would occur. And so I've been out there speaking on the issue that I hold very dear, the consent of the people to be governed over the tyranny of any majority, whether it be the majority of the legislature or in this case the majority of the Supreme Court. So I most certainly support a constitutional amendment which defines for us what the word person means from the 5th and the 14th Amendment. Because at the time that those amendments were ratified, there was no concept that there could be the beginning of life prior to natural birth. But due to the advent of medical technology in our modern times, that definition has now been brought into question. And so because of that, I think that to really finally solve this issue, to solve the issue on abortion, what we need is a reach out to the people and get our consent to be governed on this, rather than the simple tyranny of the majority from the court. And we clearly have a term of art used in the Constitution, in the 5th and the 14th Amendments, which provides for due process and equal protection of the law for all people. And so because of that question of what is a person that has come about because of our advance in medical technology, then I would support a constitutional amendment to provide us with that definition that has been changed now by this advance in our technology.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Gary. I can't think any of them off the top of my head that I would support, and my main reason is if they don't pay any damn attention to the Constitution in the first place, what difference is one more constitutional amendment going to make? So I'd say let's just concentrate on what's already there and get the government to start living up to what's already there. That's where I think our efforts should be directed.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Mr. Rice.
When you ask me this question, only one thing comes to mind. I would like to support a constitutional amendment that would repeal the 16th Amendment. I see some of you know what I'm talking about. What's the 16th Amendment, Kathy?
Tax.
Income tax. That's right. Somewhere along the way, They gave themselves the right to steal from us. Turned Congress and everybody else into a pack of thieves. We need to return our country to an honest country. Repeal the 16th Amendment, because the government, me, none of us have a right to what you make, to what you work for. The fruits of your labor belong to you and no one else except those that you choose to gift them to. No government has a right to take your income from you. If we're going to do anything about amending the Constitution, let's start right there.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Question 8, starting with Mr. Gary. When should the U.S. provide foreign aid, either military or humanitarian?
Well, first of all, I'm reminded of something Davy Crockett said. It's not yours to give. It's ours. Let us donate to the charities that we think most would help other countries. Our policies now is to give aid to their governments. So you end up with people like Gaddafi, who passes on with billion-dollar bank accounts. Where has the aid gone? It hasn't gone to the people. That's who needs the help, not the governments that only suppress the people's rights in those countries. I would support sending, in times of natural disasters, sending something like the aircraft carriers over that can provide helicopter support for rescue missions. Also sending in search and rescue teams. And those aircraft carriers got some pretty nice desalination equipment so they can provide fresh water. But other than that, no. It's not theirs to give. We're not giving it.
Thank you, Mr. Rice.
Well, in this instance, I'll have to agree with Mr. Harris. We need to do away with foreign aid. And when you say foreign aid, it didn't come to my mind the way that it did Mr. Gary, as far as more material type support. When you say foreign aid to me, I see money. I see dollar signs. I see dollar signs that don't belong to them, that they stole from us in the first place. This is another area where the United States government needs to get out of the way. Americans are the most philanthropic people on the face of the planet. If you just leave them alone, 9/11 taught us that. It didn't take a government agency to help those people. There was billions of dollars flowing in from all over the country from private individuals. Not because somebody was telling them they had to, but because we're caring, honest, philanthropic people that want to help other people. Get out of the way. Allow us to keep our money and to spend it like we want to. If somebody wants to take their whole paycheck and send it overseas to help some impoverished nation, have at it. In fact, I believe it'll do more good that way than expecting the government to do it, because once you get government involved, well, you got bureaucrats, all of them got to get paid. You got people on the ground over there that's got to administer the aid, and they got to get paid. Well, before you know it, all the aid that you send is all eat up by the people that are giving it, or the people that are over there stealing it from them off the docks before they can get it to the people it belongs to. I mean, our own history teaches us that we just don't do foreign aid very well. And if you don't do something very well, you ought to just stop it and turn it over to people that know what they're doing. The American people know what they're doing when it comes to helping other people. I trust my fellow citizens, and I care as much as they do. Let's just get out of the way.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
As a free people, our citizens have a right to be able to act on the issues of their conscience, on causes that may occur in an international stage or around the world. But they should not be allowed to act by charging the bill to we, the taxpayer, or the blood bill to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And so what I would look to do as Commander-in-Chief is to resurrect the power that was put into Article 1, Section 8 for letters of marque to be issued to those military officers that have proven their ability to lead and to husband resources in times of great need. And I would encourage those flag level officers to seek out letters of marque, which they could then use, supported by donations from our citizens around the country or philanthropic organizations and/or investors who are looking to make a profit, and those privateers could then use their letters of marque to offer their services in humanitarian aid operations around the world. And as Mr. Wrights pointed out, get out of the way and let the generosity of the American people, which has been empowered by an elimination of the 16th Amendment and direct taxation upon our citizens, to give to those institutions, those privateers, those letters of marque holders, so that way when there are humanitarian crises around the world, our very generous Americans that want to help can do so, and they can reach out to those that have been given that authority under Article 1, Section 8, not through stealing or picking the pockets, because folks, stealing is, charity and stealing are not the same thing. You cannot take from someone and force people to give to charity. So I really stand for the idea that we use our Article 1, Section 8 power to bring back letters of marque and allow privateers to act on the world stage and empower Americans to be generous and to donate and to help in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Hutter. All right, gentlemen, last question before the break. Question 9. Considering blowback from abusive U.S. military policy, how can you assure the safety of Americans without continuing to violate civil liberties? Mr. Wright.
Read that one more time.
Considering blowback from abusive U.S. military policy, how can you assure the safety of Americans without continuing to violate civil liberties?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but get out of people's way. The reason we have blowback is because of this nosy neighbor policy that we have. We have to go in and stick our nose into every problem here at home and also abroad, which causes a blowback of the proportions that we have seen in fruitions in terrorist attacks, not only here in America, but all over the world. The best way that we can protect our own citizens is to bring our troops home, for one thing. I know how many troops we have scattered all over the world right now, and I shudder to think what would happen if something did happen here at home. There's nobody here left to protect us. We got to protect ourselves, which I'm all for now. I believe in gun control. That's why I use both hands. But bring our troops home so that we can have a secure nation, and stop monkeying at everybody else's business and making them so angry and so frustrated. We claim that we're killing terrorists. With every terrorist we kill, we create another generation of terrorists behind them that are angry because we killed their father, or their mother, or their brother, their uncle, their grandfather. They react the same way that Americans would react if someone came over here and attacked us. You come romping through my neighborhood with a cannon and a tank and start killing off my neighbors and my family, well, that's liable to make me a little angry. And I'm going to start looking for ways to retaliate. Now, I tell everyone that part of my campaign is stop all wars, and I start with myself. I am not at war. But if you want to see me go to war, attack my family, attack my friends, attack my country. War is on at that point. Defense is the only reason to go to war.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Harris.
After 20 years in the Army, in the Army National Guard, and 4 deployments on the pointy end of our failed foreign policy, I can tell all of you with real conviction that our interventionist foreign policy is not working. It is what's not making us more safe. What has been done is a decades-long worth of intervention that has fostered bad feelings towards the United States, but it has also continued to spread our all-volunteer military forces to the breaking point. And so I agree with Mr. Wright. And as President, I will return all Army and Air Forces back to the United States. Yes, I will use the Navy and the Marine Corps as a robust outer defense, but return all Army and Air Forces back to the United States and focus on a defense-centric foreign policy. One that's sustainable, one that will not continue to run up our national debt, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars even more. I I actually looked to the Constitution for, how to restructure our military. Okay? Prior to the Cold War, we did not have such a thing as standing armies, standing Air Force. We looked to our National Guard and our militia to provide for our homeland defense, and I would resurrect that. Because I can tell you, as a lifelong member of the National Guard, that the National Guard can provide 10 times the combat defense power in a defense posture than can expeditionary forces spread thin throughout the world. And so that's one thing I would look to do. But another thing I would look to do to provide for our homeland security is to stand firm and strong on the Second Amendment. Day one of my presidency, not only will I emancipate and free every single American who's been locked up for nothing more than the use, possession, or distribution of a substance, but I will also pardon every single person who has had their liberty taken away for nothing more than the right to keep and bear arms. And I will make sure that our citizens know that they have the power to defend themselves and to stand up for themselves if they see their airplane being hijacked or they see their train being hijacked. Stand up for yourselves and fight back. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. Berry.
That is a massively broad question. I think there could be numerous volumes written on it. I cannot disagree with my fellow candidates about bringing the troops home. Absolutely, that's one of my first things. But there is a component of the Defense Department that I would like to see get more funding from the troop savings, and that is one section that used to be in the Treasury Department and for some reason went over to the Defense Department where I don't believe it belongs, and that is the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has been neglected for so many years that their equipment is unreliable. And the biggest part of their mission is to protect the oceans on our border and to rescue our own people when they're in trouble. And the Coast Guard does a fabulous job. I would like to see them increased. As far as the question is intending the foreign attacks, I don't know that I could add a whole lot to what the other two have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. All right, we're going to have a break now. So the second session will be questions from the audience. You'll still have the same 2-minute time limit?
Yeah, same rules.
Okay, same rules apply. Questions from the audience, and we will start with Mr. Harris.
Hi, my name is Heather Fazio. I work with the Texas Libertarian Party. Part of my job is recruitment and bringing in small L libertarians, or people who are not necessarily involved in the party but who are libertarian in philosophy. One of the problems I have found is that people have become disenfranchised with the Libertarian Party because of nominating more conservative candidates. So my question to you is, how are you going to stand out as a libertarian candidate and attract actual libertarians in this country to our party again?
Well, number one, I intend to constantly base all of my campaign positions and all of my rhetoric and answers on the philosophy of liberty and on the Constitution of the United States, which was drafted and really written and ratified, from a very hardcore philosophy of liberty standpoint. But I also intend to really point out to folks around the country that this left-right paradigm has failed us, and that you can't say, okay, well, the $15 trillion in debt that we owe is just the problem of the Democrats or just the problem of the Republicans. No, they have colluded to cause some of these problems. They have colluded on this failed foreign policy of interventionism. And what we need to be doing is looking to candidates and looking to a party who stands for more freedom and less government, and looking to those candidates who do not have any ownership for those many, many unconstitutional things which have been done to our republic and to our citizens. And so I think that there is a growing awakening of the body politic out there. There's a growing awakening of our citizenry out there that just switching back from the Democrats to the Republicans like has happened for the last many decades has not solved the problem. And so as we continue to, as I continue to press forward in this campaign and spread a positive message of restoring freedom, liberty, the Constitution and the Republic, I believe that we'll see more and more citizens that are awakening to those concepts come in and want to join the Libertarian Party, want to join our efforts and be part of our message because they realize that what we have in place right now is not working. It has not worked, and the only thing we can really do to fix it is to restore the founding principles of freedom and liberty, and not to continue this failed left-right paradigm.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
And I think certainly most of the public nowadays are interested in economic issues. And as a consequence, that tends to get emphasized. But I am dead set against compromising our libertarian principles on the social issues in order to attract the people that are most concerned about the economic issues. To me, they go hand in hand. You can't have economic freedom, but then be told you can't spend your money or you can't live the lifestyle that you want once you've got your money. On the other hand, what good is it you want to live your lifestyle and then they confiscate all your money? I don't see really how they can be separated. I think we need to present a very solid, consistent libertarian answer to all questions. And I think the most important thing we can do is be consistent, always.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Rice.
Heather, the best thing we can do is be libertarian. We've had enough of this experimenting with, trying to craft our message so that it will appeal to one group or another. I'm not interested in telling people what I think they want to hear. I'm interested in telling people what needs to be heard, in distinguishing ourselves, showing how different we are. People have had enough of the same thing over and over. Mr. Harris points out this left-right paradigm, and they flip-flop from one to the other, following promises that are never kept, believing the same lies over and over again, just coming out of a different talking head. As libertarians, we need to show alternatives. We need to start turning around some of the misconceptions that people have about us as libertarians. Of course, one of the biggest things we get is, oh, you're a libertarian. You want all our children to have drugs. Well, no, we don't. Libertarians are against death. And we know from experience that the drug war, as I stated earlier, causes more death than the drugs themselves. Children aren't out there killing each other over the drugs. They're killing each other over the money that the drugs generate. We've taken a couple of inexpensive plants and turned them into something as valuable as gold. We need to take back those issues and not spend so much time defending ourselves and spend more time telling people exactly what we are, what we stand for. As Mr. Harris said, true, strong, libertarian stances. Not be ashamed of it, not be afraid of it, not worry about the feedback we're going to get, and be prepared for it and ready to explain to these people that, no, we don't want your kids to be on drugs. We don't want everybody out there just doing whatever they want to. We do want them to do what they want to, but libertarianism means embracing a way of life that is self-responsibility and a self-determination that will benefit everyone, not just libertarians, but Americans. We don't just have a libertarian message, we have a message for all Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Next question.
About 95% of the federal government, including most of what oppresses us today, is based on court precedents. About 85% of that 95% on a single line of precedents, going back to the 1819 case of McCullough v. Maryland, continuing through the 1942 case of Wickard v. Filburn, which have rewritten the necessary and proper clause to mean not that carrying an execution is not merely making an effort, but is to do anything that legislators may feel inconvenient to achieve a policy objective. So as president, what would you do to overcome or reverse this body of precedent that is now entrenched and would take about 50 years of retraining judges in order to overturn through ordinary litigation?
Mr. Gary.
Well, the president has the power to appoint those judges, and you never know how many you're going to get in a term, but we need to definitely get a different caliber of judges. Okay, where was I going with that? I've got a Rick Perry moment here.
You need to be governor of Texas.
I would kind of like, I would enjoy being governor of Texas, yes. I would want to be a very liberal president. And when I say liberal, I want to use that little stamp that says VETO on it and just churn them out. Everything that gets on my desk is... The Constitution is usually mentioned that there's a balance of three branches. You've got the judicial, the legislative, and your executive. But if you really study it more, if the states were an additional check against the federal government, as are the juries, who have the right to judge the law as well as the facts. And the states are not fulfilling their part of nullifying federal actions, and the juries are not properly informed. And I think one of the most valuable things we can do is start informing the juries, mandating that they be instructed that they have the right to judge the law as well as to judge the facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice.
I view the job as president in much the same way that many of our early presidents viewed it, and that's in its constitutional bounds. President should be riding herd on out-of-control legislators. Biggest thing I would do is I would stop enforcing any law that I deem to be unconstitutional. The Constitution says I can do that. I expect the Supreme Court to be the busiest government entity during my administration than any other, because of all the, appeals that are going to be before it because of laws that I refuse to enforce. Appointing judges that properly reflect our ideals, and I don't just mean mine, I mean American ideals. Exactly what Mr. Gary has pointed out, to fully inform the juries that even the law itself is in the hands of the people, of us. And you don't need a law degree, you don't need a extensive education beyond reading and writing. When I take the oath of office, I am swearing to uphold this. Look how small that is. I'm not swearing to uphold the reams and reams of paper that would fill this room of all the other federal laws and whatnot that have been passed over the years. This is what I am sworn to uphold. This is what I will uphold, and this is what I will enforce, and nothing more.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you for the question, and included in the cases that you mentioned is also the Supreme Court opining time and time and time again that the line of demarcation between the executive and the legislative branches of government and whether or not they're actually fully or not fully enough engaging in the execution of their offices is what is referred to as a political doctrine question. It's a political question that's answered by we the people, by the voters. And so I totally agree with Mr. Wrights, and I've said so here earlier today, that as president, I would hold up first and foremost my oath of office, which is found in Article 2, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And what that does is, and it's also been held time and time again, that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not simple tyranny of the majority legislation. And so I would also look to not enforce legislation which is clearly unconstitutional. Our founders that wrote in some of the Federalist Papers pointed out that it would be the responsibility of one of the two branches of government not to enforce an action from another branch that they knew was clearly unconstitutional. And so I will also continue to look at that and not be party to enforcing unconstitutional legislation ever, ever, ever. I also like to kind of rebound also off of what Mr. Gary had to say. Jury nullification. I intend to make it one of the main themes of my campaign as I travel around the country to educate potential jurists, to let them know, to remind them of things like during the Whiskey Rebellion, how a jury could not be found to prosecute people that were breaking the tax laws at the time. And so therefore, eventually Thomas Jefferson just repealed, worked to repeal the whiskey tax. So, folks in this country need to be reminded that they have the ultimate power as jurors to nullify unconstitutional law. And I intend to get out there on that bully pulpit and remind them all of that, so that way they can help us in this drug war and end these other unconstitutional actions by our government.
Thank you, Mr. Next question.
Yes, thank you. This nation's documents were a statement of principle, scientific principle. Some people call it natural law. The idea that what was discovered at that time, what science and what human knowledge had given us at that point, was the idea that the relationship with man and nature is very unique. It's superior to that of animals. And thereby we have the ability to be able to create a system of government that best corresponds to what is called natural law. Now, the problem has been indicated by you all on the podium, has been that the parties, left, right, the ideologies that dominate the mainstream have strayed far, far away from this idea of natural law, scientific principle. And so the idea of universal law, I wanted to ask, as president, how would you be able to grip the imagination of the American people to return to the idea of that which is universal, and not just simply saying liberty or freedom, because we all know that those are things which most people have general ideas and vague ideas about these concepts. But how do we return this society back, and the population in general, to the idea of abiding to natural law?
Mr. Rice.
It is a great question. Of course, we as libertarians understand, more so than others, I think, about what I spoke about earlier about personal responsibility, self-determination, that no written law anywhere about anything stops anyone from doing what they want to do. It's just that simple. I mean, some people will listen to it, but there are people out there that are just not going to do what you say just because you wrote it down on a piece of paper. We've got so many laws that we need to get rid of that it's going to be a hard job, because people have gotten used to abiding by the law just because it is law. Now, in a way, we face the same problems that the founders faced when this country began. And that is that they had to teach people about freedom. It's hard for us to understand because we've tasted freedom to some extent. But the people we're talking about were raised in generation after generation after generation of just doing what the king told them to do. They didn't realize, they didn't understand how freedom could benefit them personally. How being left alone to make your own decisions, to make your own determinations about your own life would be better for them than depending on someone else to tell them what to do. This is what we have to do now. This is our challenge. Not only as presidential candidates, but as all our candidates who are our ambassadors. All of us that embrace the libertarian philosophy. All of us that live the libertarian lifestyle. To serve as an example to our fellow citizens. And to learn to explain to them how freedom will benefit them. How they will be able to prosper from being left alone. How it's good to leave people alone and only punish them when they do wrong. Don't punish them ahead of time by the regulations and laws that are steeped upon us.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Harris.
Fundamental to the natural law that you mentioned, sir, are the rights to life, liberty, and property. And
Pursuit of happiness.
that's correct. And also the pursuit of happiness. But we need those. Human beings must have control of their lives, of their liberty, of their property, to be able to prosper. And so, what I would do is go around reminding our fellow Americans that these fundamental human rights that we have that underpin the natural law that you refer to predate any document, they predate any government. As you say, they come from nature. And the reason why that's so important to understand is because if our rights come from our government, then they can be taken away by our government. And we all know that that's not true. We all know that our government cannot take away our fundamental human rights. And so that's one thing that I will make sure that I do is share that as I travel around, as I talk about what underpins the philosophy of liberty and what underpins, the reasons why those things are so important to us. And that is that we have to have access to those fundamental human rights to be able to prosper as individuals, to be able to prosper as a nation. And you can bet that as president, I will refocus the Department of Justice to ensure that it ceases infringement into our rights, into our privacy, into our lives, into our individual freedoms. And I will refocus that Department of Justice away from things like the Patriot Act, away from things like spying on us, away from things like, taking away our privacy, away from things like prohibiting us from engaging in our liberty or our pursuits of happiness or stealing our property from us without cause. I will refocus the Department of Justice away from that type of behavior and back to focusing on policing our government and making sure that our government is held in check and not oppressing and not have the Department of Justice oppressing our people.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Gary.
One of my pet peeves in life is when people talk about their constitutional rights. There's only one entity that has constitutional rights, and that's the U.S. government. The rest of us, all our rights were given to us by our Creator. The Constitution was formed that said, you will not abridge these rights. The government doesn't have the right to give us any rights. It cannot give anything that it doesn't have. We gave the government certain rights. They have abused it. They've overstepped it. It's time for us to be good parents. Slap them on the wrist. Take a belt to their behindies if we need to. Take them out behind the woodshed and teach them a thing or two, but say, you only do what we told you can do and quit doing everything else. I don't think that particularly answers the natural law question. I'd love to get into that some other time, but I don't think I can do it in a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Last question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Giovanni Neal. I was an educator. I lost my job due to the budget shortfall this year in Texas. And I guess my question is, I'm new to libertarian ideals, and I believe in a lot of them. But some of them, I'm just not sure about. And one of them is the elimination of, for example, the Department of Education and the Department of the EPA. If you did eliminate these departments, where would we find resolve? Because a lot of times the federal government provides checks and balances for the states as well.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you for the question, and I would like to say that I'm very sorry to hear about what happened to you as an educator, but also to let you know that, decades and decades and decades of tyrannical rule from our federal government on education and educational issues has not protected you, has not protected our educators, and has not protected our teachers. That is better done by we the people looking out for our own children's needs, our local communities, our local governments. The federal government we continue to send out trillions of dollars in our resources up to the federal government, only to see it trickle back to our states in pennies and dimes and nickels, instead of allowing our citizens, our states, and our local communities to focus on their own educational needs. And those communities will be able to do a lot better solving those issues than our federal government does. Our federal government gives us one solution, which it doesn't even have the constitutional authority to do. And if that solution doesn't work for school districts here in Texas, or they don't work for school districts in Oklahoma, or maybe they work well for school districts in some other state, then we all have to suffer through, while some benefit and some don't. And that has to stop, because the Constitution didn't give our federal government the power to do that in the first place. So I want to re-empower our local communities, our individuals, our tribal governments to take ownership, to reassert their ownership over this issue that I believe falls under the 10th Amendment, and let them handle this issue, as I think that they'll do a much better job. And the last many decades we have of the federal government's record on this should really bear that out, that they are not the stewards of education that they have claimed to be, and they don't have the constitutional authority to do so. And as it applies to the EPA, why do we have all these federal lands? We should be making sure that these lands are divested back to the states from which they fall in, or the native tribes that own them, and then it would be up to them to work through their legislative bodies for protection of their own lands, not have the big brother, the federal government, pushing down on them, trying to tell them how to manage their properties, how to manage their environmental issues. That should be up to the local governments, the state, and the tribes.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Daly.
Well, let me say welcome to the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian Adventure. It'll be a learning experience for the rest of your life. It has been for me. I'm still finding points that I didn't know. When I first joined the party, I had questions, and I read our platform, which was much more detailed in those days than it is now, and ran across parts of it that I said, man, this is bizarre. How can this possibly be? And I've read a lot of the philosophy behind it, of why it does work, and it does make sense eventually. And like Mr. Harris said, something like the Department of Education, what is good for a public school in the Bronx doesn't necessarily work so good in Muleshoe, Texas, or Stillwater, Oklahoma. I'm sorry, I don't know any of the real little towns. or in the Watts area of LA. Every school district, every community has different needs. And one central bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. cannot possibly dictate something that is good for every human being or every society. We all have our own ways of teaching. We have our own ways of learning. So you're on a great adventure. I've enjoyed the ride. There's a lot of great literature out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Mr. Wright.
Well, I too, I'm sorry that you have lost your job, but I will remind you that it was the state of Texas that did that to you, not the American people, not the folks around you. And as both of my colleagues have pointed out, I do believe the answer to this, particularly in education, is to return it to the lowest level possible. The towns, the communities where people live, where people know the children and what they need to learn. We know from the No Child Left Behind Act that more children get left behind when government gets involved than anything else. You know, and I felt like that you were on the cusp of asking, well, if we do away with it, what do we replace it with? And I'll respond to that by giving you a Thomas Sowell quote. If you put out a fire, what do you replace it with? Sometimes, nothing is better than something. As Mr. Gary aptly pointed out, it is ridiculous to think that a federal Department of Education can craft some sort of criteria, some sort of curriculum that will suit all the children from Maine to California. Children in California are best educated by the people of California, by their parents, in direct relation to their teachers, like you. Some of the highly educated students in our country right now are homeschooled because parents do a better job of educating their own children than any government bureaucracy. EPA is the same way. The government is the biggest polluter in this country. They certainly, I don't see the sense in allowing them to control who's going to pollute and who's not when they're the largest offenders. Sometimes government just doesn't work, and we need to seek other solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. All right, gentlemen. Last question. How can your campaign unify the various factions within the Libertarian Party? Mr. Gary, you're laughing already.
He loves this question.
Oh, yeah? Mr. Gary.
Am I under the gun?
Weren't you?
Careful now, because whatever you say, I'm just going to say what he said.
He's a radical. And I would probably classify myself in that also. It's, we're a diverse group of people. We all have our ideas on how best to promote liberty. First of all, we don't want to be, well, we want to play nice. Let's put it that way. We don't, the enemy is not our fellow libertarians. The enemy is big government. And how will a campaign, how will my campaign unify everybody? Well, first of all, I want to there's actually three major groups in the Libertarian Party, and for the lack of any other titles, they seem to have gotten the Reformer, the Radicals, and who were the others? I've forgotten their exact title that they use, but they're not very well known. The Reformers want us to concentrate on issues which the public is interested in, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I don't want to give up my libertarian principles in doing that. And I don't want to take some non-libertarian stance on a social issue in order to attract the people in the economic libertarians. So I don't think I answered your question very well.
That was all the time. That's all the time you get.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright.
Okay, I changed my mind. I'm not going to say just what he said.
You even know what I said.
I was listening, but I was not going to say. I think that my campaign already promotes unity within the party. Everywhere I go, I start out the same way. I'm Lee Wrights. I am not at war. Now, some people are at war their whole lives. They never leave home. The libertarians cannot even think about stopping the wars outside of a convention hall until we stop the wars inside its walls. We spend too much time concentrating on the 5% of things that we disagree on, and not enough time looking at the 95% of the stuff that we all agree on, that we all want. I don't think any of us have stood up here tonight and said one thing that a Libertarian Party member would disagree with. I can't imagine that. You have seen unity tonight. You have not seen a debate. You've seen an interview between three men that respect each other for what they stand for and believe in the same things. You're looking at unity right here tonight. I don't believe that you could go wrong with any of us as your presidential nominee. And I'll support whoever it is. And I will encourage my followers, my people that support me, to do the same thing. Not to walk away, not to be mad because you don't get what you want. You do that, you don't ever get what you want. All or nothing usually winds up that you get nothing. So we need to concentrate on that 95% of the things that we all agree on. Understand that we're brothers and sisters. Start caring more about each other and worrying about the enemy outside the walls of the convention hall, because the enemy's not in this room.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Harris.
Well, I intend to continue running a campaign that's focused on positive message of freedom and liberty, and the philosophy of liberty, and support for, you know, the Constitution and the restoration of our republic and our freedoms. I intend to really share that message with as many, not just libertarians as I can, but with our fellow citizens as I possibly can, I really encourage them to watch the video that'll no doubt of this event be posted on the internet, so they can see, you know, what real statesmen look like. They're not up here. We're not up here, you know, fighting and picking on each other and talking about issues that don't matter. And so my campaign has a commitment to continue to focus only on the issues of substance that matter for our time. We're not going to get involved in personal discussions or attacks or this kind of nonsense that we see from the other major parties. So that way, when we come together in May and we select a nominee and a vice nominee, that the rest of the party, hopefully, if all of our candidates that join this race continue to act in such a manner, it'll be very easy for all the factions of our Libertarian Party to come together and support both the top of the ticket and the bottom of the ticket and the middle of the ticket. And so that's what the Harris campaign is going to continue to do, is to focus our energy and our message on positive things, on the Constitution, on the Republic, on freedom and liberty, and on policy, strong, fair, and honest policy debate, and show the American people what a real discussion looks like on the issues, and not some silly catfight on who wrote in a book, or who said what and when to who, and who can point their finger at another candidate more forcefully when the cameras aren't looking. That kind of stuff, it has no place in our party, and I'm so glad this is the second debate that we've been at, and none of that has happened. So I think Lee Wrights is exactly correct. You're seeing unity here, and I think that as we go into our nomination process, I also make that same commitment that you do, sir, to support whichever one of these fine libertarian candidates eventually winds up winning this nomination.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'd like to point out to everybody that we actually had a 30-second rebuttal period in this debate in case somebody said something bad about the other. And I didn't think we would need it, and sure enough, we didn't need it. And I didn't think we would, so. Thank you all, gentlemen. That was absolutely delightful.
Thank you. And thank you for coming out.